Welcome to our channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our spooky stories. I have always been fascinated by stories of haunted places, urban legends, abandoned houses, forgotten cemeteries. But nothing compares to what I discovered about the old Ridgewood Amusement Park. Hidden deep in a forest, the park was once a haven of joy and laughter, until a series of tragedies turned it into a permanent nightmare. The park was opened in the 1950s and quickly became a popular destination for families from all over. With its thrilling roller coasters, colorful carousels, and food stalls, Ridgewood was a place where the worries of everyday life vanished, replaced by smiles and adventures. But then, the accidents began. First, it was the main roller coaster, the Serpent's Fury. On an apparently normal day, the front car derailed at full speed, throwing its occupants off and resulting in multiple fatalities. The park closed temporarily, but reopened after a few months with promises of increased safety measures. The tragedy, however, seemed to cast a permanent shadow over Ridgewood. Less than a year later, a mysterious fire consumed the House of Mirrors, trapping several people inside. The screams of desperation were drowned out by the crackling of the flames, and when the firefighters finally put out the fire, they found only ashes and the lingering smell of burnt flesh. Reports of hauntings began to emerge. Visitors spoke of seeing pale faces in the windows of the attractions, hearing distant laughter that vanished with the wind, and feeling inexplicable chills as they walked through the park. The local press loved the stories, and soon Ridgewood Amusement Park gained a reputation for being haunted. Over time, families stopped visiting, and the park was permanently closed. Decay and abandonment took over the place. The roller coasters rusted, vegetation grew unchecked, and the rides became silent skeletons of a distant past. But the legends never died. The locals still avoided the park, whispering about the spirits of those who had died there, trapped forever between joy and horror. Ridgewood became a meeting spot for the curious and the brave, who came in search of a glimpse of the supernatural, often running away pale and trembling, vowing never to return. This is the setting that drew a group of teenagers, convinced that the stories were just exaggerations. Little did they know that by crossing the rusty gates of Ridgewood Amusement Park, they would be entering a nightmare they could never have imagined. It all started on a hot summer night, typical for that time of year. Four inseparable friends, Lucas, Beatriz, Igor, and Mariana, were gathered in Lucas's garage. Between laughter and stories of past adventures, the conversation eventually took a darker turn. Beatriz, known for her bravery and insatiable curiosity, was the first to suggest the idea. Have you ever heard of Ridgewood Amusement Park? As she asked, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and fear. Of course, they had all heard the rumors, but no one had paid them much attention. After all, ghost stories are common in any small town. Igor, ever the skeptic, chuckled. Oh, you're not telling me you actually believe in that nonsense, are you, Bea? It's not about believing or not, as she replied, crossing her arms. It's an opportunity for a real adventure. Just think about it, exploring an abandoned amusement park, finding out if the legends are true. It's the kind of thing we'll remember for the rest of our lives. Lucas, always the mediator of the group, looked at Mariana, who had been quiet until then.
And you, Mari?
What do you think? Mariana, the most sensible of the group, hesitated for a moment before answering. Well, I don't believe in ghosts, but it sounds like a good story to tell later, doesn't it? As long as we're careful. With a general consensus and a mix of skepticism and enthusiasm, the friends began to plan their exploration. They decided to go the following night, when the full moon would cast a silvery light over the park, creating even more terrifying shadows. Each of them brought the essentials: flashlights, fully charged phones, and, at Beatrice's insistence, a camera to document everything. On the designated night, they met at the agreed-upon meeting spot near the park's main entrance. The beams of their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing the rusty gates that creaked in the wind. Each of their hearts raced, a mix of adrenaline and fear of the unknown. We're really doing this," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice steady. We'll go in, take a look around, and leave."
No crazy stunts.
Beatrice led the group, pushing the gates open with a metallic groan.
Let's go, everyone.
Adventure awaits. As they crossed the threshold between the real world and the realm of legends, they could not foresee what was to come. The darkness enveloped them, and the silence of the abandoned park seemed heavier, as if something invisible was watching them. The stories they knew would become real in ways they could never have imagined. With cautious steps, the friends ventured into the park, each holding their flashlight tightly, the beams of light flickering slightly in their hands. They were about to discover that some legends are more than just stories, and that some places are abandoned for a reason. As they crossed the rusty gates, the group was immediately enveloped by a sense of desolation. The park, once full of life and laughter, was now a decaying vision of abandonment. The structures that once held vibrant attractions were now rusted and falling apart, covered by a thick layer of vegetation that seemed to want to swallow everything. This is really creepy," Mariana whispered, gripping her flashlight tightly. It's like time stopped here." Beatrice, with her camera ready, began to film.
This is the best part.
Imagine the views we'll get when we post this." As they walked through the darkness, their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the park was returning the sound with an unsettling resonance. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the silence, a high-pitched creak that seemed to come from one of the rusty rides. Did you guys hear that?" Lucas asked, his heart racing. It sounded like someone was messing with the Ferris wheel. The beams of their flashlights swept across the area, revealing the imposing silhouette of the Ferris wheel, standing still for decades. The gentle wind made the seat sway slightly, but the sound had been much more intense than just wind-induced movement. Suddenly, Igor shouted, Over there, at the House of Mirrors."
ISAV so meeting.
They all turned to where he was pointing, but saw nothing but distorted reflections in the few remaining mirrored surfaces. However, the feeling of being watched was palpable, as if the mirrors themselves held memories of past tragedies. They continued exploring, each trying to maintain their composure. As they passed by the carousel, Beatrice decided to take a closer look. The figures of the horses seemed frozen in an eternal race, their painted eyes now looked empty and oppressive. As she approached to film, one of the horses moved, swaying slightly as if someone had pushed it. This is impossible," as she murmured, stepping back. It can't be the wind." Further ahead, at the old game booth, Lucas saw something that made his blood run cold. There was a dirty, torn stuffed toy that seemed to move slightly from side to side, as if an invisible child was playing with it. Guys, there's something wrong here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Let's stick together and stay alert." The tension grew with every step. The inexplicable sounds became more frequent, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in the group, distant children's laughter that dissolved in the wind, and whispers that seemed to come from all directions. Mariana, who had been the most skeptical at the start, began to feel a chilling cold, as if something was touching her skin. Is anyone else feeling this? It's like something is watching us. And then, as if to confirm her worst fears, the flashlights began to flicker, dimming and brightening intermittently before coming back to life. The group huddled together, their faces illuminated only sporadically, revealing expressions of pure terror. At this moment, they realized that the stories they had heard about Ridgewood Amusement Park were not mere urban legends. Something dark and malevolent was present, something that did not want them there. And with each step they took, the feeling that they were approaching an indescribable danger grew stronger. The group moved forward slowly, the flickering flashlights casting shadows that danced ominously around them. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and every noise seemed amplified by the oppressive silence of the park. It was when they approached the old haunted house that things really started to spiral out of control. Lucas was the first to notice something strange. As he walked beside the rusted ride, he felt a cold touch on his shoulder. He turned quickly, but no one was there. Did you see that?" He whispered, his face pale. The others shook their heads, but they knew they were not alone. Suddenly, Mariana screamed,
Help!
"Someone is here!" They all ran towards her, finding her kneeling and trembling.
I saw a boy.
He was there standing, and then he disappeared. The group was now in full panic mode. Beatrice tried to calm everyone down, but her own hands were shaking as she held the camera. "Okay, let's get out of here. We've seen enough." But as they turned to leave, they realized that the path they had taken was not the same as before. The park seemed to have shifted, the familiar landmarks now unrecognizable in the darkness. The place was now a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. Desperation set in as they tried to find their way back. They wandered through the twisted corridors of the park, the sense of dread growing with every step. They were lost in a place that had become an endless maze of fear and illusion. At some point, Beatrice stopped filming. The group was too frightened to even talk, their eyes darting around as they tried to find a way out. The weight of their situation was beginning to sink in, and they could not ignore the fact that they were facing something far beyond their understanding. And then they heard it, a soft, melancholic melody, like a carousel playing in the distance. The sound was both inviting and horrifying, drawing them towards it. Against their better judgment, they followed the sound, hoping it would lead them out of the park. When they reached the source of the music, they found themselves in front of the old broken carousel. The horses were still, and the music played on a loop from a dusty, forgotten speaker. The scene was eerily beautiful, but it only served to deepen their terror. It was then that they saw him, a shadowy figure standing beside the carousel. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its face hidden, but the aura of sadness and despair was unmistakable. Who are you?" Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond but reached out a hand towards them, its gesture both pleading and threatening. The friends took a step back, their fear escalating. The figure began to move closer, and the park seemed to come alive with the echoes of the past tragedies. In a frantic attempt to escape, they ran in different directions, each person finding themselves alone in the desolate park. The park's illusions twisted their perceptions, making it impossible to distinguish reality from the phantoms of their nightmares. Lucas found himself in the remains of the House of Mirrors, where the broken glass distorted his reflection into grotesque shapes. He could see the shadowy figure lurking behind him, but whenever he turned around, it was gone. Beatrice ended up in the abandoned funhouse, where the walls seemed to shift and warp. The laughter of children echoed through the corridors, but it was a mocking, cruel laughter that seemed to mock her fears. Igor wandered into the old roller coaster, where the creaking tracks and rusted cars loomed over him like a dark, foreboding presence. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and he could hear faint whispers of those who had died on the ride. Mariana found herself in the park's overgrown gardens, where the silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves. The darkness closed in around her, and she could feel an oppressive weight bearing down on her. They were each confronted by their own fears and the horrors of Ridgewood Amusement Park. The park was not just a place of supernatural terror but a reflection of the darkest corners of their minds. After what seemed like hours of wandering and encountering terrifying apparitions, the friends finally found each other again, exhausted and broken. They were more terrified than they had ever been in their lives, but they knew they had to leave. With trembling hands and heavy hearts, they made their way back to the entrance, guided only by the faintest glimmers of moonlight. The park's darkness seemed to chase them, but they managed to escape its grasp, emerging into the cool night air. As they walked away from the park, the sounds of the past tragedies faded into the distance. The experience had changed them, and they would never forget what they had seen. Ridgewood Amusement Park had shown them that some places are haunted not just by spirits but by the fears and regrets of those who had lived and died there. They knew they had been lucky to escape, but they also knew they had been marked by the park's darkness. Ridgewood Amusement Park would always be a part of them, a haunting memory of a night they would never forget.